This is going to be my entry for Scabs Sandwich Slicing Competition. The reason I chose this knife, this is actually the first knife that I ever made, probably close to 10 years ago. As the sheath is a little tight, also one of my early Kydex sheaths. It does have a lock here. What I've learned since then is when I make a Kydex sheath, I put a couple layers of tape on here, just blue painter's tape on each side, and then form the sheath, and that'll leave just a little bit of room so that the knife slides in and out pretty easily. I'm going to take and heat this up with a heat gun and fix this. Now this knife is made out of 3/16 inch thick 1095. This knife was originally about this tall. It's a kukri style blade, and what I used this knife for was testing and perfecting a heat treat for 1095. So I heated it up in the kiln and did an oil quench and tested it, and you couldn't even scratch the steel with a file. After that, I did the tempering process, which is where you put it back in the oven for a certain temperature twice for 2 hours. And I brought it down to a hardness that I knew was going to be too hard, and I knew the steel was going to chip. So I was using 2x4s and oak that had knots in it, very tough woods, and I was batoning this knife through it and beat on it. I mean, really beat on it heavy, and I got the blade to chip. So then I reground it down past the chips, and I put it back in the oven to soften the steel up just a little bit more. Then I tested it again, and it still chipped. So then I lowered the hardness just a little bit more. Tried it again, and it passed. I wanted to find a sweet spot just where the edge would stop chipping when you beat on it. Because let's face it, this is a chopping knife. This is something that you're going to be hitting knots. You're going to be hitting hard things with it, and you don't want the blade to chip. But yet you do want the knife to be as hard as possible. You don't want the edge to roll either. And then to verify it, I made a second knife. This was more of a standard knife, the second knife, following that heat treat recipe, and I got the exact same results. Perfect results with no chipping. Looks kind of crude. I do use and abuse this knife. This is great for doing yard work. I can leave this in my vehicle. The handle is walnut with brass pins. The grinds are a little rough. Like I said, this was the first knife that I ever made. And it even has the hidden lanyard in the back. So not bad for a first attempt. So I figured what we would do is get this knife back out. And let's just give it a little touch up. Show you how you can sharpen something with a recurve in it. I get my angle, and I can also look at the edge and see how it's getting cleaned up to tell if I should change the angle or not. I'm going to go right about there. And in this recurve section, sure, it'll just hit the edges of the stone, but you can still do it. So just give this a quick touch up. When I have a small sharpening stone and a larger knife, I tend to more use the stone passing over the knife rather than trying to work the knife over a small stone. It's just a little bit easier. So just give this a little bit of a touch up. Not too much. It doesn't really need too much. Okay, so after a quick touch up, let's see where we're at. Slices cleanly. I think we're ready to try this on a sandwich. Today's lunch is a nice sandwich from Subway and a bag of chips. Now, I had asked them not to cut this sandwich, but they did it anyway. So what we're going to have to do is quarter it. Let's go right about here. And let's do the other side. Cuts nice and clean. Still works. Chops great. I do wish that the blade was a little taller. I think the knife looked better as originally ground, but like I said, I used this to perfect the heat treat, and even though it's rough, still a little rough looking, it's still a great knife, and this is one that I typically leave in my car. That's my entry for Scabs Sandwich Cutting Challenge.